The word hit her like a slap across the face. Harlot. Hannah Norris heard it clearly, carried on the dry desert wind through the open door of the general store, spoken in the particular tone that only Mabel Fitch could produce, honeyed on the surface and rotten straight through to the core. Hannah's hand froze on the bolt of blue calico she had been inspecting. Her jaw set. Her dark eyes went still in the way that happened just before something in her turned to iron. She rides alone. She shoots better than any man in this county, and she sleeps God knows where and with God knows who, Mabel continued, her voice carrying through the thin plank walls like a saw through green wood. I am telling you, Ruth, a woman who carries a badge and a pistol has got no business calling herself decent. My Harold says she probably earned that marshal's position on her back, and I think Harold has the right of it. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the door of Hargrove's general store swung open hard enough to rattle the glass jars on the shelves, and every soul in the dim interior went rigid at the sight of Marshal Hannah Norris filling the frame. Her badge caught the noon sun. Her expression was something carved out of granite and fury both at once. Say that again, Hannah said, her voice low and precise as a bullet finding its mark, and you will regret it, Mrs. Fitch. That is not a threat. That is a promise from the only law this town has got, and I keep every promise I make. Mabel Fitch's powdered face went the color of old flour. Ruth Calloway pressed herself against the pickle barrel. Old Tom Hargrove behind the counter found something extraordinarily interesting to study in the grain of the countertop. Hannah held Mabel's gaze for a long, unbearable moment. Then she stepped inside, collected the items she had come for, paid Tom exactly what was owed, and walked back out into the blinding light of Redemption, New Mexico, in the summer of 1884. Nobody said a word, not for a long time after. But the thing about words, Hannah had learned, was that once people said them once and survived, they said them again. The gossip about her had been building for 3 months, ever since she had ridden into Redemption wearing her dead father's badge and a letter of appointment from the territorial governor. And in those 3 months, she had done everything right, and nothing had mattered. She had brought in 2 cattle thieves, settled a water rights dispute that had been simmering toward bloodshed for 2 years, and kept the saloon from burning down on 3 separate occasions. And still. She walked back to the marshal's office, which was a low adobe building near the end of Main Street with a single jail cell and a desk that wobbled on one short leg, and she sat down and pressed her hands flat on the desktop and breathed. She was 28 years old. She was proud of that badge. She was going to keep it. To understand why it mattered so desperately, you had to go back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, not the childhood years in Santa Fe with her father Marcus Norris, who had served as a deputy for 11 years before a horse threw him and broke 3 ribs and forced him into retirement. Though those years mattered too, mattered enormously, because they were the years she had learned to read tracks and read people, and read the particular quality of silence that meant trouble was coming. No, the beginning that mattered most was 6 months ago in the winter of 1883, when Governor Lew Wallace had sent her the appointment letter. The letter had come because of what happened in Cimarron. Because Hannah had ridden into Cimarron on her own, following information she had pieced together from 3 different sources over 4 months, and had identified the man responsible for a string of stage robberies that had cost the territory $40,000 and 4 lives. She had brought him in alone, and she had done it clean, and the story had made the territorial papers, and Governor Wallace, who was a practical man more interested in results than in the gender of the person producing them, had written to her with a proposition. Redemption needed a marshal. The previous one, a man named Pete Dawson, had drunk himself into incompetence and then ridden away one morning and never come back. The town was growing, the railroad was coming through in 2 years, and redemption needed someone who could hold it together in the meantime. Would she take the position? She had said yes. She had not known about Mabel Fitch then. She had not known about a great many things. But she had said yes, because her father's badge had been gathering dust on her windowsill for 4 years, and because something in her had always moved toward exactly this kind of work the way water moved toward the lowest point in the landscape. Naturally, inevitably, as though there were no other direction that made any sense. So she had ridden into redemption in late March, and she had gotten to work. The problem, she would later realize, was not that she was a woman doing a man's job. The problem was that she was a woman doing the job better than any man in town could have done it. And in a place like Redemption in 1884, that particular brand of excellence produced a particular kind of resentment in certain quarters. Not in everyone. Old Tom Hargrove respected her. Doc Elias Pierce respected her. The Mexican families in the southern quarter of town, who had been largely ignored by Pete Dawson, respected her enormously. The children followed her around like she was something remarkable, which she supposed she was. But Mabel Fitch and her circle, and the husbands of Mabel Fitch's circle, and the men who drank at the back of the saloon and talked about how things ought to be, those people had decided early on that Hannah Norris was either a joke or a scandal, and they had been working hard to settle on which. Today, she had answered that question for them. She was neither. She was the marshal, and she kept her promises. 2 days after the confrontation in the general store, something happened that changed everything. He rode in from the north on a dun-colored horse, which was ordinary enough. He had a bedroll, a rifle in the saddle scabbard, a saddlebag that looked worn but well cared for, which suggested a man who maintained his possessions, which suggested a certain kind of character. Hannah watched him from the window of her office, because it was her habit to watch every rider who came in from any direction, cataloging details the way her father had taught her. The set of the shoulders, the quality of the tack, the way the horse moved and whether it showed signs of hard riding or easy traveling. This horse showed signs of steady, purposeful travel, not running from something, not hurrying towards something in a desperate way, just moving with intention. The man swung down in front of the livery stable with the ease of someone who had been on horseback for so long that the dismounting was entirely automatic, and he spoke to the stable boy in a way that made the boy smile, which meant he was either kind or charming, and Hannah had learned to figure out pretty quickly which of those two things a given stranger was. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed, though the sun and the trail life could add years to a face, and she had learned to account for that. He wore a deputy's badge on his coat. She was outside and walking toward him before she had consciously decided to move. "Marshal," he said when she was close enough, and the fact that he identified her badge and her authority without any flicker of surprise or confusion immediately lifted him 3 places in her estimation. "Deputy," she said, "who are you riding for and what brings you to redemption?" "My name is Wade Langley," he said. "I am riding for the territorial circuit out of Lincoln County. I am passing through on a tracking assignment and I need information, a fresh horse if yours is available, and a meal if there is somewhere decent to get one." He said it straight and plain without any of the particular social awkwardness that men sometimes produced when they were talking to her and fighting the fact that she was a woman in a position of authority. He just talked to her the way a man talked to another professional, which was exactly what she was. "The horse depends on what the livery has available, which I cannot tell you," she said. The meal is at the Sunrise boarding house. Mrs. Paz Delgado runs it, and the food is the best in town. The information depends on what you are tracking. A man named Silas Croft, Wade said. Jumped a federal courier 3 weeks ago, took a diplomatic pouch that had no business being in New Mexico but was there anyway, and the territorial office wants it back quietly. You had any strangers come through recently? She studied him. Let us go inside, she said, and you can show me your paperwork. It was the right thing to say. Most men, when a woman said that to them in a position of authority, produced one of two reactions: annoyance, or that particular kind of amusement that was really just condescension wearing a friendly coat. Wade Langley did neither. He simply said, "Of course," and followed her into the office. His credentials were in order. She had an eye for forged documents, and these were genuine. She told him about the two men who had passed through 8 days ago, heading south toward the Rio Grande crossing at Chalco, and she described them accurately from memory. The kind of memory her father had drilled into her, the kind that recorded details without effort. Wade listened to her without interrupting, and when she finished he said, "That is very precise. The description matches." "I make it my business to notice strangers," she said. "I can tell." He paused. "You have been marshal here for how long? 3 months. Is it going well?" It was a personal question. Personal questions from strangers were not something she normally invited. But there was something about the directness of it, the genuine curiosity behind it rather than any prying quality, that made her answer honestly. "It is going well enough," she said. "There are people here who have decided I am a scandal and people who have decided I am a joke, and I am working on changing their minds. The work itself is going fine." Something moved in his expression. Not pity. Nothing as condescending as pity. Something more like recognition. "I know something about that," he said quietly. She looked at him. "About being thought a scandal. About doing a job well and having people insist on seeing something other than the job." She wanted to ask him what he meant by that, but she let it go for the moment. There would be time. She had the instinct, which she had learned to trust absolutely, that Wade Langley was going to be in redemption for longer than one meal. She was right. It turned out that Silas Croft had not continued south. He had doubled back, a classic move from a man who knew he was being tracked, and he was almost certainly somewhere within a 15-mile radius of redemption, which meant Wade's tracking assignment had just become her problem as much as his, and she said so. "If Croft is in my jurisdiction," she said, sitting across the desk from him in the late afternoon light, "then I am involved in this whether the territorial office planned for it or not. I know this territory. I know the hiding places. I know the people who might shelter a stranger for money." Wade looked at her steadily. "I was not going to suggest you stay out of it." "I know," she said. "I am saying it anyway because I have had deputies and federal agents ride through here before and assume that local jurisdiction is something they can move around." "That is not how I operate," he said. "Good." She stood. "Then tomorrow morning early we start looking for Croft. In the meantime, I will send word to a couple of people who might know something." He stood as well, automatically, the way a man stood when someone who commanded respect left a room, and she noticed it and appreciated it without making anything of it. "Mrs. Delgado's boarding house," she said. "Tell her I sent you. She will give you a fair rate." He thanked her and left. She sat back down and looked at the wobbling desk for a long moment. Then she shook her head slightly and pulled out the stack of correspondence she had been meaning to get through all day. She was the marshal. There was work to do. But she thought about the recognition she had seen in his face when she had talked about the job. She thought about it for quite a while. The next morning came in gray and cool, which was unusual for July in New Mexico, and made the air feel like a gift. Hannah was already mounted and waiting outside the office when Wade arrived at first light, and she noted with approval that he was exactly on time, which told her something about his reliability. They rode north first, toward the canyon country, because that was where Hannah had sent word the night before. To a man named Aurelio Campos, who ran a small ranch up there and knew every inch of the terrain, and had served as an informal informant for her on 2 previous occasions. Aurelio had sent a boy back at midnight with a message that said there was smoke from the old Harker claim, which had been abandoned for 6 years, and sat in a natural bowl that you could not see into from the trail. Wade rode well. She had noticed that the day before, but now she had more time to observe. He handled the horse with easy confidence, reading the terrain ahead and adjusting his pace without making any of it look deliberate. He knew the desert. You could tell the difference between someone who had learned the desert and someone who was just passing through it, and Wade Langley was the former. "Where are you from originally?" she asked, when they had put a mile between themselves and town. "West Texas," he said. "Outside Abilene." Ranch family, he confirmed. "Until I was 22, and then I started working for the county sheriff's office and then the circuit, and here I am." She nodded. That accounted for the way he sat a horse and the way he read the land. "Any family now?" "My mother is still in Texas. My father passed 3 years ago, 1 sister in Kansas, married with 2 children." He glanced at her. "You?" "My father was a lawman," she said. "My mother died when I was 11. It was just my father and me after that until he passed 2 years ago." "Is that his badge?" She was quiet for a moment. "It is." "I am sorry," he said. And it was the right kind of sorry, the kind that did not press or linger, that simply acknowledged and moved on. The old Harker claim was exactly where Aurelio said it would be, tucked into a natural bowl in the canyon wall where a spring seeped out of the rock and made a little patch of green that would be invisible from any distance. They left their horses back around a bend in the canyon and went the last 300 yards on foot, and Hannah was glad to find that Wade Langley moved quietly. A lot of big men did not. He did. There was indeed smoke. And when they came over the lip of the bowl and looked down, there was indeed a man. Silas Croft was not what she had imagined from the description. He was small and narrow-shouldered, with a patchy beard and a darting quality to his movements that reminded her of a coyote that had learned to be afraid of everything. He was crouched over a small fire, holding something above the flames, a tin cup, and he had a rifle propped against the rock beside him and a pistol on his hip, but his attention was on the coffee. "I will go around," she said quietly. "Give me 4 minutes." Wade did not argue. He simply looked at his pocket watch and gave her a nod. She moved around the edge of the bowl, using the rock and scrub for cover, until she was on the opposite side from Wade and slightly higher up. She had her pistol drawn and she counted the time in her head, and at the 4-minute mark she called out, clear and carrying, "Silas Croft, you are surrounded by federal and local law enforcement. Put your hands up and do not touch that rifle." Croft startled so violently that he knocked his coffee into the fire. He spun toward her voice, saw her on the ridge above him, began to reach for the rifle, and then stopped when he heard Wade calling from the other side. "Think very carefully," Wade said, his voice calm and almost conversational. "You are in the bowl. We are on both sides. Even if you shot one of us, the other one has you. Put the rifle down." Croft put the rifle down. He raised his hands. He still had the diplomatic pouch in his saddlebag, exactly where it was supposed to be. He had not opened it, which Wade said was consistent with what the territorial office believed. That Croft was a courier himself, paid to transport it to a third party rather than a man interested in the contents. She cuffed him and walked him back to the horses, and he spent the ride back to Redemption complaining about his back and his feet and the quality of the spring water. And she let him talk because men who talked were men who were not planning anything, and she had a perfectly good jail cell waiting for him. Wade filed his preliminary report at her desk, while she locked Croft in and sent a wire to the territorial office. They worked around each other in the small space with a comfortable efficiency, like people who had been doing this together for much longer than one morning. "You move quietly," he said, when the paperwork was mostly done and they were both sitting with the mugs of coffee that Tom Hargrove had sent over from across the street along with a plate of biscuits, because Tom was genuinely thoughtful. "My father taught me," she said. "He said the most important skill in the work is patience and quiet, and that most people mistake noise and speed for effectiveness." He sounds like he was a wise man. He was. She wrapped both hands around the mug. "He always told me I should have been born a boy, but he never once let that stop him from teaching me everything he knew. He said a useful person is a useful person, and he was going to make sure I was useful." She had not said that to anyone in Redemption. She was not entirely sure why she was saying it to Wade Langley, who she had known for less than 24 hours, and who was going to leave once the federal transfer of Croft was arranged. "My sister," Wade said after a moment, "is smarter than me by a considerable distance. Always was. She wanted to study medicine. She was told repeatedly that women did not study medicine. She eventually married a doctor instead, and she does most of the actual doctoring while he does the charging for it." His voice carried something dry and rueful. "The waste of talent in this world because of stubbornness about who ought to do what is something I have thought about a great deal." She looked at him. "You think about things like that?" "I think about a great many things," he said. "I have a lot of time on the road." She found herself smiling, which was not something she did casually or often. It felt, for a moment, like something very easy and natural and unexpected all at once. The territorial office took 3 days to send a marshal to transfer Croft. 3 days in which Wade Langley stayed in Redemption, because it was his responsibility to ensure the transfer of his prisoner, and in which he and Hannah found themselves working together in the casual, unplanned way that happens when two competent people occupy the same professional space and discover they operate on the same frequency. He helped her serve a property dispute notice to a man named Gus Whalen, who had the unfortunate combination of being large, angry, and perpetually half-drunk. Not because she needed help, she had handled Gus on her own twice before, but because he was there and offered, and she accepted because it was a practical offer and not a patronizing one. There was a difference. She had learned to feel the difference. They ate dinner at Mrs. Delgado's twice. Paz Delgado fed them both enormous amounts of food and watched them with the benevolent attention of a woman who had decided something was happening that she approved of, even if neither of the involved parties had noticed it yet. Hannah had noticed it. She just was not sure what to do with it. The gossip, meanwhile, had gotten worse. Or rather, it had gotten more specific, because now there was a particular target for it. Mabel Fitch, stung by the confrontation at the general store and looking for a way to reclaim the narrative, had seized on the visible and daily presence of Wade Langley in Hannah's professional life and transmuted it into something salacious, which was Mabel's particular talent. Hannah heard it secondhand, from Doc Pierce, who delivered the information with the apologetic discomfort of someone carrying a heavy thing they did not want to be carrying. "I am only telling you," Elias said, sitting across from her desk on the second evening, "because you should know what is being said. Mabel and that circle are telling people that the deputy is here because you sent for him personally, and that the criminal was a pretext, and that the territorial office does not know he is here. Hannah stared at him. That is not only wrong, it is demonstrably wrong. His credentials and the transfer paperwork are filed with this office. I know that, Elias said patiently, but Mabel does not particularly care what is true. She cares what sounds true, and this sounds true to people. To some people, he said carefully, not to everyone. Tom thinks it is nonsense. The Campos family thinks it is nonsense. Most of the town, I think, is not listening to it. But enough are, she said. He did not answer, which was answer enough. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What did she say exactly?" He hesitated. Elias. What did she say? He told her. It was worse than she had expected. Mabel had constructed an elaborate and creative fiction in which Hannah had been conducting an inappropriate relationship with Wade for some time, in which the badge was essentially a front for a life of complete moral recklessness, and in which the people of redemption were being played for fools by a woman who had no business being in a position of authority. Hannah sat very still for a long time after he finished. Then she stood up, put on her hat, and walked out of the office. She found Wade at the boarding house, sitting on the front porch in the fading light with his boots off and a book in his hands, which was a detail she filed away without examining too carefully, because there was no time for it right now. "I need to talk to you," she said, and sat down in the other chair without being invited, because it was that kind of a moment. She told him what Mabel was saying. She told him straightforwardly, without embellishment, because embellishment was not in her nature. She told him because he was involved in it, even if entirely without his knowledge or consent, and he deserved to know. When she finished, he set the book down on the porch rail. He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked. "I am going to confront her," Hannah said. "I am going to do it publicly, the way she does her damage, and I am going to make it clear that the story is false and that I have documentation to prove it." "That seems right," he said. "It might not stop it," she said. "Sometimes nothing stops people like Mabel Fitch." "No," he agreed. "But you will have done the right thing, and the people who are capable of knowing the difference will know the difference." She looked at him. The evening light was doing something warm and complicated with the shadows, and she looked away again. "The thing that bothers me most," she said, "is not what she is saying about me specifically. I have handled worse. The thing that bothers me most is that she has never once looked at what I have actually done for this town and tried to see it. She decided what I was before I dismounted on the first day, and every single thing I have done since then she has bent to fit what she already decided." "That is the most exhausting kind of fight," Wade said, "because you are not fighting the lie, you are fighting the decision to lie." She turned back to him. Something about the way he said it, the accuracy of it, the fact that he had articulated exactly what she had been feeling for 3 months without being able to name it, made something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly it." He was looking at her with that same quality of attention she had noticed the first day, steady and direct, without any of the social deflection that people used to avoid genuinely seeing someone. "For what it is worth," he said, "you are the best marshal I have worked alongside in 4 years of circuit riding, and I have worked alongside 8. She was quiet for a moment. "That is worth a great deal," she said. "Thank you." She went back to her office. She sat at the desk that wobbled, and she thought about the things she was going to say to Mabel Fitch. And she thought about Wade Langley sitting on the porch with his boots off and his book, and the way he had said the decision to lie as though it were something he had thought about, something he had perhaps experienced himself. In the morning, she went to find Mabel. She did not go to the general store, where the confrontation would happen on Mabel's territory, surrounded by Mabel's allies. She went to the church. Because Mabel Fitch went to the church every morning between 9 and 9:30 to help arrange the flowers for the Sunday service, which was a task Mabel had made exclusively her own some years ago. Hannah knew this, because she made it her business to know the routines of every significant person in her town. The church was empty except for Mabel and the preacher's wife, Dorcas Cole, who was a quiet woman with a good heart and no particular love for Mabel's gossip, but who had never been in a position to say so openly. Hannah walked in, nodded to Dorcas, and stood in the aisle while Mabel turned around with a bunch of cut zinnias in her hands and went very still. "Mabel," Hannah said, and her voice was level and clear in the small wooden space. "I want to talk to you about what you have been saying about me and Deputy Langley." "I am sure I do not know what you mean," Mabel said, in the particular voice of someone who knows exactly what you mean. "I think you do." Hannah reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded paper. "This is the official tracking assignment issued by the Territorial Marshal's office to Deputy Langley, dated 17 days ago. This," she produced another paper, "is the warrant for Silas Croft's arrest, also from the Territorial office. This is my correspondence with the Territorial office confirming the assignment. Everything is documented, everything is official, and everything contradicts every single thing you have been telling people." Mabel's chin went up. "Documents can be made up by anyone." "They can," Hannah agreed. "Which is why these are all originals with official seals and why Postmaster Greer can confirm when they arrived and from where. I have already spoken to him." She had, at 8 o'clock this morning. "I am also going to speak to Reverend Cole about the matter of bearing false witness, which I believe is something his congregation takes seriously." Dorcas Cole made a small sound that might have been stifled laughter. Mabel's face was deep red now. "You cannot come in here and threaten me." "I can and I have," Hannah said, "but I want to be very clear. I'm not threatening you out of personal spite. I am telling you what the facts are, and I am asking you to stop spreading fabrications about me and about a federal deputy who is doing his job. I am asking you because it is the right thing to do, and because the alternative is a formal complaint to the Territorial office about interference with law enforcement, which I am entirely willing to file." She folded the papers and put them back in her pocket. "You decided something about me the day I arrived," she said. "I know that. I cannot change what you decided. But I can tell you that everything you have decided is wrong, and that this town needs a marshal more than it needs your opinion of what a marshal should look like. I have kept this town safe and fair for 3 months, and I am going to keep doing it long after you have run out of things to say about me." She nodded to Dorcas, who looked at her with something very close to open admiration, and she walked back out into the morning. Her hands were steady. They had been steady the whole time. She was still the marshal, and she had just reminded herself why. Wade left on the 4th day when the Territorial Marshal arrived to take Croft south to Lincoln. She was at the office when he came to say goodbye, and they stood on the porch in the clear morning light and shook hands like the professionals they were. "I hope redemption treats you better," he said. "I hope so too," she said. "Thank you for your help." He paused. There was something in the pause that she recognized but did not name, because this was not the moment for naming it. "I will be through this circuit again in 6 weeks," he said. "If there is anything outstanding, jurisdictionally speaking." "I will keep that in mind," she said, which was not precisely the same thing as saying yes but was not no either, and he seemed to understand the distinction. He mounted, tipped his hat, and rode south with the Territorial Marshal and their prisoner. She watched him go until the dust settled. The 6 weeks moved in the way time moves when you are busy and purposeful, and also waiting for something you have not admitted you are waiting for. She tracked down a livestock theft ring that had been operating out of a ranch to the east. She negotiated a peaceful resolution to a boundary dispute that had produced 3 firearms and nearly a shooting. She found a young woman who had gone missing from the southern quarter and who had in fact gone to Albuquerque of her own free will to take a job in a dressmaker's shop. And she wrote to the family to reassure them without revealing the young woman's chosen destination, because sometimes the law was also about discretion. She thought about Wade Langley occasionally. She did not allow herself to think about him excessively, because that was not the kind of woman she was. But she thought about him the way you think about a conversation that went somewhere interesting, with a kind of low, sustained curiosity about where it might go next. Mabel Fitch had gone quiet. Not warm. Mabel would never be warm toward Hannah, and that was simply a fact of life, but quiet. The fabrications had stopped, at least the ones Hannah could hear. Doc Pierce reported no new ones. Tom Hargrove said the same. Dorcas Cole had, apparently, spoken to her husband, who had spoken to Mabel in whatever private terms the situation required, and the result was a cooling of the campaign. Hannah took no particular satisfaction in this. She had done what needed doing, and the outcome was the outcome. What she wanted, and what she did not know how to want or even exactly why she wanted it, was something else entirely. The railroad survey team arrived in early September, which brought a new complexity to redemption, because land values would shift when the route was confirmed. And several people had already decided to take advantage of this knowledge in ways that were not entirely legal. This kept her very busy for 2 weeks, and she did not think about much except the problem directly in front of her. Wade rode in on a Tuesday just before noon, when she was sitting outside the office eating an apple and reviewing a land deed that someone had filed with 2 different signatures on it. She heard the horse and looked up. The dun-colored horse. The same easy, purposeful approach. She was aware of something happening in her chest that she had no particular name for, only that it was warm and involuntary, and she set the apple down and stood up in a way that she hoped was entirely professional. "Deputy Langley," she said. "Marshal Norris," he said, and swung down. He looked at her with that direct, steady attention. Anything outstanding? She found herself smiling again, that same easy and unexpected thing. "As a matter of fact," she said, "yes, I have a forged land deed and a railroad survey team that 3 different people are trying to bribe." "That sounds like a full day," he said. "Several full days," she said. "Come inside." He had not specifically told her he was coming back for anything other than professional reasons. She had not specifically indicated she wanted him to come back for anything other than professional reasons. But they both understood the way that 2 people understand things when they have chosen to approach a truth sideways, because coming at it directly felt like too much exposure, too soon. He stayed for a week. He helped her untangle the land deed situation, which involved interviewing 7 people and cross-referencing 3 years of county records. He had a methodical patience with paperwork that she found deeply useful, and also, she admitted to herself on the 3rd evening, deeply appealing. There was something about a man who would sit across a desk from you for 4 hours going through documents without complaint or restlessness that was more attractive than she had ever expected such a thing to be. On the 4th day, during a break from the paperwork, he said, "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from the deed she was reading. "You can ask." "Have you always been this certain of yourself?" Not condescending, genuinely curious, she thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "When I first started working cases with my father, I was terrified of being wrong. He was never unkind about it, but I was very aware that every mistake I made would be attributed to my being a woman and not to my just being inexperienced, the way any young person is inexperienced. So I was very careful always, more careful than I needed to be, probably. And now I am still careful, she said. But the certainty came with the evidence. Every case I closed correctly, every judgment call that turned out to be right, it built up. I did not start certain. I became certain, he nodded slowly. That is the right way to get there, he said. Starting certain is just arrogance. Getting there is earned. She set down the deed. What about you? Are you certain? He considered it. In the work mostly, in other things less so. He paused. I have made mistakes in my personal life that I would not make again if I were given the chance, and the making of them has made me more cautious than I perhaps need to be. She did not ask what the mistakes were. She stored the information carefully, the way she stored all information, and thought about it later. That evening, Paz Delgado invited them both to dinner at the boarding house in the way Paz invited people to things, as a statement of fact, cheerfully non-negotiable. They sat at the big table with 3 other boarders and a couple of the Mexican families from the southern quarter who were there for Paz's birthday, which Hannah had not known about but had apparently been invited to celebrate. There was music later, a guitar and a fiddle from 2 of the Delgado cousins, and the chairs got pushed back and several people danced in the cleared space, and Hannah stood by the window with a glass of lemonade and watched, and Wade came to stand beside her. "You dance?" he asked. "I know how," she said carefully. "That is not the same thing as yes," he said. "No," she agreed. "It is not." He stood beside her for a moment watching the dancing, and then he said, "Would you?" She looked at him. He was looking back at her with that expression she had come to know, the direct, steady one that offered something without demanding anything. She set down the lemonade glass. They danced to the fiddle music in Paz Delgado's cleared boarding house parlor, and it was the most uncomplicated thing Hannah Norris had done in a very long time. He was a decent dancer, not showy but competent, which was exactly what she would have expected of him. She was a better dancer than she generally let on, because dancing had been the thing her father could give her in place of the things other girls learned from their mothers, and they had danced in the kitchen of the Santa Fe house to music from the hand-cranked music box until she could do it in her sleep. His hand was warm at her back. She was aware of it with a particular and concentrated awareness. "You said you know how," he said. "I do know how," she said. "I simply have not had occasion to do it in some time." "Why not?" She considered the answer. "Because I have spent the last several years in positions where doing something like dancing would have been used as evidence against me. Evidence that I was frivolous or compromised or not serious, and I am very serious." "I know that," he said. "The 2 things are not mutually exclusive." "No," she said, "they are not." He looked at her for a moment with something she could no longer pretend she was not seeing clearly. "Hannah," he said. He used her given name for the first time, and it was not unconscious, it was deliberate, a step across a threshold, and they both knew it. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." The music went on, and they danced, and around them Paz's cousins played their fiddle and guitar, and several people smiled in that universal way of people witnessing something they recognize. She would have said before this that she did not have time for this. She would have said that the job was everything, and that anything else was a distraction and a vulnerability that she could not afford, not here, not now, not in a town that was already looking for reasons to discount her. She would have said all of those things, and meant them, and been partly right and largely wrong. The week ended, and the land deed situation was resolved. The forger was a man named Calvin Briggs who had been buying up parcels at fraudulent prices and reselling them to railroad investors, and he was now in her jail cell waiting for a circuit judge. The railroad survey team had been satisfied that the bribery attempts had not affected the survey results, which was the most important thing. Wade had to leave. The circuit did not stop for anyone. They stood outside the office again in the early morning, and this time the farewell was different. Not dramatically different, not declarations or promises made hastily in a moment of sentiment, but different in the way of two people who have acknowledged, at least to themselves, what is real, and who have decided to trust that knowledge rather than flee from it. "I will write," he said. "I would like that," she said. He mounted the dun horse. He looked at her for a moment with all of that directness. "You are remarkable," he said, not as a flattery, as a simple factual statement. She felt color rise in her face, which was unusual for her, and she was glad for the shadow of her hat. "Ride safe," she said. He rode south. She watched the dust. The letters started arriving 2 weeks later. She had half expected them not to arrive. She acknowledged privately, the kind of person who expected good things to not happen, because experience had demonstrated this to be the safer expectation. But they arrived, regular as clockwork, once a week, sometimes more. From Lincoln, from Albuquerque, from a small town called Mesilla, where he had spent 3 days tracking a counterfeiter, and found the man on the 3rd day exactly where his evidence said the man would be. She wrote back. At first carefully, professionally, a correspondence between 2 colleagues in adjacent jurisdictions. Gradually something else. The letters lengthened. The subjects expanded. He wrote to her about his sister's situation with the doctor, and the anger he felt at the waste of it, and the admiration he felt for his sister's pragmatism in the face of it. She wrote to him about her father, the real version, not the sanitized version she gave people. The version where her father was a good man and a wise man who also drank more than he should have after her mother died, and who had struggled enormously with the guilt of raising her into a world that would make everything hard for her, even as he gave her every tool he had. She told him things she had not told anyone in redemption, and she told them without the feeling she had sometimes in letters, of performing an intimacy she did not feel. She felt it. It was surprising and a little alarming and entirely real. He came back in October, 6 weeks after the second visit, this time with no criminal to track, and no federal assignment beyond what his paperwork said was a jurisdictional consultation on the railroad survey dispute, which was a real thing but also a pretext, and they both knew it and neither of them said so. He stayed for 2 weeks. The town noticed. The town always noticed everything, because small towns in 1884 were observational organs of extraordinary sensitivity. What the town noticed this time, however, was different from what it had noticed in the summer. Because now, there was context and time and visible reality to work with. And what the visible reality showed was 2 serious, competent professionals who also happened to spend their non-working hours together in ways that were entirely proper and publicly visible. Paz Delgado noticed and was delighted. Tom Hargrove noticed and nodded in a satisfied way. Doc Pierce noticed and told Hannah, with characteristic bluntness, that it was about time she let herself have something nice. "He is a good man," Elias said, leaning in her doorway with his medical bag in his hand and the look of someone who has made up his mind. "I can tell. You can tell too. I know you can." "You can tell a great deal from a doorway," Hannah said, without looking up from her paperwork. "I am a doctor," Elias said serenely. "Reading people is my profession too." She did not answer, which was an answer. On the last evening of that visit, they walked along the road that went out toward the canyon country in the long golden light of an October afternoon. Because October in New Mexico was the most beautiful month, and the light in the late afternoon was something that made even the scrub brush, and the red rock looked like something from a painting. "I have been thinking," Wade said. "About what?" she said. "About what comes after this. After the circuit ends. It is a 2-year assignment and I have 1 year left." She was quiet for a moment, listening to the particular silence of the desert that was not really silence at all, but was composed of wind and insects and the faint sound of their boots on the dry ground. "And after the circuit," she said, "I could apply for a permanent posting," he said. "Or I could look for something different, a sheriff's position or something local." She looked at him sideways. "Something local in a particular location," he looked back at her. "Is that a question?" "I think it is." He stopped walking. She stopped a step later and turned to face him. The light was doing that golden thing with the shadows, and she thought that she was going to remember this exact moment, the quality of the light and the particular scrub pine to his left and the sound of the wind, for a very long time. "I am not a man who says things he does not mean," he said. "And I am not going to say things to you just because they would be pleasant to hear, so I am going to say this once plainly, and you can do with it whatever you think is right." "All right," she said. "I have not felt this way about anyone in a long time," he said. "I have felt it carefully and thought about it carefully, and I am satisfied that it is real and not just the effect of working closely with someone interesting. I think you are extraordinary. I think what you have built here is extraordinary. And I would like very much to find a way to be in proximity to it, if you have any interest in that, and if you do not, I will understand it, and I will still write letters, and I will still come when there is a jurisdictional consultation that needs doing." She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved through the scrub pine. "Wade," she said, and she put the same deliberateness into his name that he had put into hers the first time he used it. "I am a marshal. I am going to be a marshal for as long as I am able to do the work well, and I am going to take it seriously, and I am not going to let anything compromise it." "I know that," he said. "I would not ask you to. And I am not an easy person," she said. "I am particular and I am private and I take a long time to trust people, and once I trust them I take it very seriously." "I know that too," he said. "I could tell the first day." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "Then yes, I have an interest in that." He looked at her with something that was quieter and more genuine than happiness, something more like relief and certainty and a deep, settled warmth. He reached out and took her hand carefully, the way you take something that matters. She let him. And the warmth of it moved up through her arm and settled somewhere in her chest, and sat there like something that had finally come home after a very long journey. They stood in the late October light holding hands beside a scrub pine on the edge of the New Mexico desert, and the world was very quiet and very large and very good. He left the next morning. The circuit still had a year to run. The year that followed was not a simple year. Nothing about the work was simple, and Hannah was not the kind of person who wanted simple. In November, a band of outlaws hit the stage line 3 times in 4 weeks, and she spent 12 days in the field tracking them with Aurelio's help, and the help of 2 deputies she borrowed from the county seat. They caught 4 of the 5, which was good work by any standard, and the 5th rode north into Colorado and became someone else's problem. In January, the railroad's route was officially confirmed, and Redemption went temporarily a little mad with the particular madness of land speculation, and sudden wealth and sudden debt, and she had her hands full keeping the resulting disputes from producing violence. The jail cell, which had been mostly empty for months, was suddenly full on 3 separate weekends with men who had drunk too much in celebration or desperation and made poor decisions. In March, she was formally reappointed by the territorial governor for a 2nd year, which was announced in the territorial papers, and which Tom Hargrove posted prominently in the window of the general store. She read the notice through the glass from the street and felt something warm and uncomplicated move through her. She was the Marshal. She was going to go on being the Marshal. Wade's letters came faithfully through all of it. He was in Roswell in November, in Las Cruces in December, in a tiny settlement near the Arizona border in January that apparently had more illegal activity per square mile than anywhere he had ever worked. His letters were detailed and direct, and sometimes funny, and they made her laugh in the evenings at her wobbling desk in a way that was private and genuine. He came back in April, when the circuit officially ended, and he rode north with one final assignment to close out, and a letter in his saddlebag from the territorial office offering him a permanent position in Albuquerque. He arrived in Redemption on a Thursday afternoon in early April, when the desert was showing the first tentative signs of spring, and the zinnias that Paz Delgado grew in pots on the boarding house porch were beginning to push up through the dry soil. She was out when he arrived, serving a civil notice on a rancher to the north, and she rode back in the early evening to find his dun horse at the livery stable and his familiar handwriting on a note tucked under the door of her office. The note said, "At Mrs. Delgado's when you have time. No rush. W.L." She went directly. He was sitting on the porch again, which was becoming a place that she associated with him so specifically that she could not look at the empty chairs without thinking of him. He was not reading this time. He was watching the sky go purple above the canyon walls to the north. "You are back," she said. "I am back," he said. She sat down. The evening came in gently, the way April evenings did in the desert, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, which was one of the things she valued most about him. That silence with him was not uncomfortable or requiring of management, but was simply quiet. "You got the Albuquerque offer," she said eventually. "I did," he said. "You know about it." "The territorial office wrote to me as well as the local authority in case I had input on your conduct and suitability," she said. "Which I do. Your conduct is excellent and your suitability is beyond question." "Did you say that in the letter?" "I said substantially that," she said, with more formal language. He looked at her with that expression again. "What do you think I should do?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should do what is right for you, and I think you should tell me what you are actually considering rather than what you think you are supposed to be considering." He turned toward her fully. "What I am actually considering is whether there is any position in or near Redemption that would suit my qualifications, and whether the territorial office would accept a counter-proposal." She looked at him. "The county seat at Guadalupe is 15 miles east," she said. "They have been looking for a sheriff for 8 months. I know because they have written to me twice asking if I can recommend anyone." He was very still for a moment. "Have you recommended anyone?" "I have not yet," she said. "I have been thinking about who might suit the position." He smiled then, a full and genuine one that she realized she had not seen often enough, and she thought she would like to see it considerably more frequently. "I would suit the position," he said. "I think you would," she agreed. He reached over and took her hand as he had on the evening in October with the same care. "Hannah, you are very careful with words." "I am," she said. "So I am going to be very careful too," he said. "I did not come back to Redemption to close out an assignment. I came back because you are here, and I have spent a year being very certain about that, and I would like, if you are willing, to stop conducting this by letter and start conducting it in person, with the intention of making something permanent of it." She looked at him for a long time. The sky above the canyon walls had gone from purple to deep blue, and the first star had appeared. "Permanent," she said. "I am not asking for an answer tonight," he said. "I am telling you what my intention is so that you can think about it clearly, the way you think about everything." She nodded. "That is a sensible approach." He squeezed her hand gently. "You are the most careful and the most formidable and the most compelling person I have ever met," he said, "and I intend to spend a very long time telling you so if you will allow it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I already know my answer." He waited. "Yes," she said simply. He looked at her with that quiet, certain warmth that was better than any grand gesture she could have imagined. "Good," he said. Paz Delgado brought them lemonade 20 minutes later, without being asked, with a wide and entirely unsurprised smile. The next several months moved in the best possible way, which is to say busily and warmly and with a great deal happening that was good. Wade submitted his counter-proposal to the territorial office, which took some negotiation because they were genuinely interested in the Albuquerque position. But they were also practical people, and the sheriff vacancy in Guadalupe County was a real problem, and Wade's record was precisely what they needed to fill it. He was appointed sheriff of Guadalupe County in June of 1885, with his office in the county seat of Tres Cruces, 15 miles east of Redemption on a good road that was easily covered in 2 hours on horseback. The town of Redemption received this information with mixed feelings. Several people were pleased for Hannah in a straightforward way. Several others, and Mabel Fitch was in this category, though she had the sense not to say so loudly, thought it was an inappropriate situation for a woman who was supposed to be upholding the law and the proprieties simultaneously. What they discovered was that Hannah and Wade, individually and together, operated with such transparent professionalism and such obvious mutual respect that it was very difficult to construct a scandal from the available materials. He came to Redemption on weekends when the work allowed. She rode to Tres Cruces occasionally on similar terms. They were visible and open about the relationship in the way of two people who have nothing to hide, and the visibility was its own answer to any whispers that might otherwise have grown in the dark. Doc Pierce announced his approval loudly and repeatedly, which carried weight in the community. Paz Delgado adopted Wade with the benevolent completeness with which she adopted all people she approved of, and began saving him his preferred cut of whatever she was making on Friday evenings. Tom Hargrove told him one morning with the succinct warmth of a taciturn man making an effort that Hannah deserved the best and he had better be it. "I am working on it," Wade told him. "Good," Tom said. "She will keep you honest." "She already has," Wade said. In October, on an evening very much like the October evening the year before, they walked the road to the canyon again in the long golden light. She had learned to look for the particular scrub pine that had been to his left during that first conversation, and she found it and felt the quiet pleasure of a landmark that meant something. He stopped at the same spot. She stopped too. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a ring. It was plain and good, a gold band with a single small garnet, nothing excessive, nothing theatrical. The kind of ring that a man bought when he had thought carefully about who he was buying it for. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Wade Langley," she said. "Are you asking me something?" "Hannah Norris," he said, and his voice was steady and certain and very warm. "Will you marry me?" She did not make him wait. "Yes," she said. "I will." He put the ring on her finger, and they stood in the October light. And she thought that she was going to remember this moment too. The quality of the light and the particular scrub pine and the warmth of his hands, and the way the desert went quiet and still as though it were listening. They were married in December of 1885, in Redemption, in the church where Mabel Fitch arranged the Sunday flowers. The ceremony was performed by Reverend Cole, who did it with evident pleasure and a brevity that both Hannah and Wade appreciated. Paz Delgado provided the wedding dinner, which was enormous and extraordinary, and involved every person from the southern quarter of town, and a number of people from Tres Cruces as well. Tom Hargrove gave Hannah a hand-carved wooden box that had belonged to his late wife, which he said he had been waiting to give to someone who deserved it. Elias Pierce made a toast that was funny and sincere in equal measure, and made Wade laugh out loud at the precise same moment it made Hannah's eyes go bright, which Paz said later was the clearest possible sign that the two of them were exactly right for each other. Mabel Fitch came to the ceremony, because she was the sort of woman who would not give anyone the satisfaction of her absence. She sat in the back pew in her best blue dress, and she watched Hannah walk into the church in a simple cream-colored dress that Paz's niece had made, and something in Mabel's face shifted in a way that perhaps only Dorcas Cole, sitting beside her, could see. Not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement, a seeing of what was there. Dorcas said nothing, but she reached over and patted Mabel's hand once, and Mabel let her. Hannah saw none of this. She was looking at Wade, who was standing at the end of the aisle in his best coat with his badge catching the light coming through the small church windows, and whose expression when he saw her was the most uncomplicated and certain and completely open thing she had ever seen on any person's face. She walked toward him. The years after the wedding were full in the best possible way, complicated and real and full of ordinary moments that were, when she looked at them honestly, extraordinary. She kept the Marshal's position. He had always known she would and had never once suggested otherwise. They kept separate offices, 15 miles apart, and they coordinated on jurisdictional matters with an efficiency that the territorial office frequently cited as a model for interjurisdictional cooperation. Occasionally, the territorial marshal would ride through and remark on it with a bemusement that suggested he had not quite anticipated this particular outcome when the original appointments were made, but that he was satisfied with it nevertheless. They had a son in 1887, born in the spring when the desert zinnias were pushing up through the dry soil. She had kept working until 2 weeks before he came and went back to work 6 weeks after, which produced some comment in certain quarters and absolute zero surprise from anyone who actually knew her. They named him Marcus, for her father. He was a healthy, cheerful child who took his father's coloring and his mother's directness, and who from a very early age had the habit of watching people with a careful attention that both his parents recognized in themselves. Paz Delgado held him for approximately the first 4 hours of his life, taking over from the midwife with an authority that no one questioned, and announced that he was beautiful and good, and that she was essentially his grandmother from this point forward. Nobody argued. Marcus grew into a boy who asked questions that adults sometimes found difficult to answer, and who read everything he could get his hands on, and who could already, by the time he was 4 years old, identify horse tracks from dog tracks and tell them apart from the tracks of the roadrunners that crossed the yard of the house in Tres Cruces, where they had eventually made their permanent home. The house was Wade's, technically, since his position required him to be based in Tres Cruces, and Hannah rode to Redemption for her duties and stayed at the boarding house on nights when the distance made the journey impractical. It was an unusual arrangement, but it was theirs, and it worked because they had built it on the foundation of 2 people who understood what the other needed and chose to honor it rather than require the other to be smaller. Tom Hargrove told her once in his succinct way that he thought the arrangement was sensible and that he had never seen her look better. "I feel better," she said honestly. "Keep your eyes open, though," he said. "Both of you, the work is still the work." "I know," she said. "I always know." She did. The work was always the work. But now the work existed alongside something else, something warm and constant that made the difficult parts of the work sustainable in a new way. She came home after long weeks in the field and Wade was there. And they sat on the porch of the treacherous house in the evening light and talked about the cases and the people and the territory. And Marcus climbed on his father and demanded attention. And the whole shape of her life had a fullness that she had not known she was missing until she found it. In 1889, they had a second child. A girl this time, born in November when the desert air had the particular sharp clarity of late autumn. Hannah had wanted a girl in the way she had not quite admitted wanting anything. And the small, warm weight of her daughter was something she held with a tenderness that surprised her by its depth. They named her Clara, for no particular reason except that the name was right, and they both knew it from the moment it was suggested. Clara was entirely unlike her brother. Where Marcus was quiet and observant, Clara was vocal and exploratory and constantly in motion. And she had Wade's calm temperament and Hannah's total refusal to be stopped by any obstacle that presented itself. Marcus, who was 2 when Clara arrived and therefore in the process of developing opinions about everything, regarded his new sister with a solemn deliberateness for the first week, and then decided she was acceptable, which Paz Delgado said was the most professional reaction to a sibling she had ever witnessed from a 2-year-old, and which Hannah thought was the best possible indicator of her son's character. Redemption in 1889 was a different place from redemption in 1884. The railroad had come through as planned, and with it, a population that had nearly doubled, new businesses, new complications, and a new set of social dynamics that required all of Hannah's accumulated skill and patience to manage. The town had grown past the point where a single marshal could know everyone personally, which had been one of her great advantages in the early years. She hired a deputy. Her first. His name was Joaquin Campos, Aurelio's son, who was 23 and serious, and had grown up in the canyon country with the same instinctive knowledge of the terrain that his father had. He was also, she noted, exactly the kind of person who would have been overlooked by the previous establishment of redemption, and she found a particular satisfaction in changing that. Joaquin was excellent. He was methodical and observant, and had a quality of physical calm in confrontational situations that was exactly what you wanted in a deputy. He also hero-worshipped Hannah in a way that he was too professional to express directly, but that she could see in the quality of his attention when she explained her reasoning on a case. She took it seriously. She had had Marshal Norris as a teacher, and she knew what a good teacher could mean. Mabel Fitch died in the winter of 1889, of a heart condition that Doc Pierce said had been developing for years. Hannah went to the funeral, because she went to every funeral in redemption as a matter of both duty and respect. Dorcas Cole told her afterward that Mabel had said something in her last weeks that Dorcas felt Hannah should know. That she had been wrong about the marshal, and that she had always known she was wrong, and that she had not been able to stop herself anyway. Dorcas said it with the careful honesty of someone delivering a complicated truth that she believes matters. Hannah thanked her and said nothing more about it. She told Wade that evening, sitting on the porch of the treacherous house with the children asleep inside and the stars enormous above the desert. "What do you feel about it?" he asked. She thought about it. "Mostly I feel that it did not need to be the way it was," she said. That the cost of it, to me and to her both, was real and it did not need to happen. But I also know that she could not have been different than she was, and that knowing that does not change what it cost, but it makes it easier to put down. He took her hand. He had always known when to take her hand. "Marshal Norris would have been proud of you," he said. she looked up at the enormous stars. "I know," she said. "That is what I tell myself when I am most tired." The year 1890 brought the railroad expansion and a new wave of settlers, and with them, a new complexity of disputes and pressures and opportunities that kept both Hannah and Wade thoroughly occupied. It also brought a letter from the territorial governor's office that produced one of the few moments of pure, uncomplicated joy that Hannah had experienced in her professional life. She was being asked to serve on a newly formed territorial commission that would develop guidelines for law enforcement standards across New Mexico. 6 people, chosen from different parts of the territory for their experience and their records. She would be the only woman on the commission. She read the letter 3 times. Then she put it down and sat very still for a long moment. Then she walked out of the office, rode the 15 miles to Tres Cruces, and found Wade in his office reviewing a property boundary dispute file. She put the letter on his desk. He read it. He looked up at her with an expression she recognized, the quiet, certain warmth that she had come to know as the particular face of his love for her. "Say yes," he said. "I was going to," she said. "Good," he said. He stood up and came around the desk and put both hands on her face and kissed her with the tender deliberateness of a man who has been in love for years and who has not gotten tired of it. And she leaned into it with the uncomplicated pleasure of a woman who has learned to receive love without bracing for it to be taken away. "You are going to change things," he said against her hair. "We are going to change things," she said. "This is your territory too." He held her for a moment in the Tres Cruces sheriff's office, while outside the window the New Mexico morning went about its business with complete indifference, and she felt the particular solidity of him, the specific warmth and weight of this man she had built a life with, who had seen her completely from the first day and never once flinched, who had come back and stayed. "I love you," she said, which she said to him every day but which still meant the specific thing it meant every time, not a routine but a renewal. "I love you," he said, which was true in exactly the same specific way. Marcus was 3 now and Clara was a few months old. They had a house and 2 offices and 400 miles of territory between them, and work that mattered. They had the particular kind of ordinary, extraordinary life that is built slowly and carefully by 2 people who choose each other deliberately and keep choosing. That evening she came home to find Wade had made dinner, which he did on evenings when she had ridden in from redemption and would not have had time, and Marcus had drawn something on a piece of paper that he presented to her with great solemnity. It was, after considerable study, identifiable as a horse. "That is very good," she said, with the serious attention his effort deserved. "It is a dun horse," he said. She looked up at Wade. "He has been watching me draw," Wade said, with that full and genuine smile. She looked at the drawing again, the careful attempt at a dun-colored horse, drawn by a 3-year-old boy with his father's calm deliberateness and his mother's determination to get it right. She thought about the day she had watched a man on a dun-colored horse ride into redemption, the way she had cataloged his details automatically and then gone outside before she had consciously decided to move. She thought about a confrontation in a general store and a promise she had made and kept. She thought about her father's badge catching the noon sun. She thought about a wobbling desk and a jail cell and paperwork, and dancing in Paz Delgado's parlor and October light on the road to the canyon, and a ring with a single garnet, and the particular sound of the desert going quiet and still as though it were listening. She thought about all the ways she had fought to stay exactly who she was and had been allowed to, because the right person had seen it and valued it and stood beside it. "It is a very good dun horse," she said, and she hugged Marcus and kissed the top of his head, and he squirmed away with the dignified impatience of a 3-year-old. And Clara made a sound from her cradle that suggested she had opinions about being left out of the affection. And the house was full of noise and warmth, and the smell of whatever Wade had cooked on the wood stove. She put Marcus's drawing on the wall beside the window, where the morning light would catch it. The Territorial Commission met for the first time in Santa Fe in November of 1890. Hannah rode north with her files and her notes and her 11 years of accumulated professional knowledge, and she sat at a table with 5 men who had varying degrees of comfort with her presence, and she did not give any of them the luxury of doubting her for very long. By the end of the second day, the man across from her, a veteran marshal from the Northern Territory named Cornelius West, said to her directly that he had not expected to find her as knowledgeable as she was. "I know," she said pleasantly. "Most people don't. I find it a useful starting position." He laughed, which she had not expected. "Your husband is the Guadalupe sheriff?" he asked. "He is," she said. "I've heard good things about him, too." "He is excellent," she said simply and without qualification. "You are a formidable pair," Cornelius said. "We try to be," she said. The commission met 3 more times over the following year, and the guidelines they produced were distributed to every law enforcement office in the New Mexico Territory, and represented the first formal professional standards the territory had ever adopted. Hannah's contribution to them was substantial, particularly in the areas of evidence handling and jurisdictional cooperation, and she wrote her name to the final document with a feeling that she recognized as the deepest kind of professional satisfaction, the satisfaction of work that would outlast the immediate moment. She thought of her father, who had given her everything he had and made her into something extraordinary while worrying that he was giving her an impossible road. She wished he could have seen the document. She wished he could have seen all of it. But she thought that somewhere in whatever came after, Marshal Norris knew. She thought that he had always known, the way he had always believed in her, even when the belief was complicated by his love and his guilt and his knowledge of the world and all its unfairness. She thought he was proud. The marshal's office in Redemption had a new desk by 1891, one that did not wobble. Tom Hargrove had replaced it himself, unasked, while she was in Santa Fe for the commission's final meeting, and she had come back to find it there with a note in Tom's cramped handwriting that said only, "You have been putting up with this long enough." She kept the old one in the back of the office, because it had been hers from the first day, and she was not sentimental about most things, but she was sentimental about that. Joaquin Campos was, by now, more than capable of running the day-to-day operations of the marshal's office, and she was already thinking about what the next year would bring. The territory was changing. The frontier was closing in ways she could feel. The railroad had done what railroads always did, and the wilderness that had defined this land was being pushed back and redefined. The work was changing with it. She had no desire to leave it. The work was still the work. But the shape of what the work required was evolving, and she was evolving with it, and that felt right. That felt like exactly what her father had trained her to do, to read the landscape, to read the people, and to move accordingly. One evening in the autumn of 1891, she and Wade sat on the porch of the Tres Cruces house and watched the sunset turn the canyon walls into something that looked like it belonged in a painting. And Marcus, who was 4 now and extremely opinions forward, demanded to know why the rocks were red. Wade explained with patient precision the geological process of iron oxide in sandstone. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. "Can we dig some up?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Wade said. "You promised," Marcus said immediately. "I did," Wade agreed. Hannah watched her son negotiate with her husband, and thought about how much of life was exactly this. ordinary and precise and full of small negotiations and small fulfillments, the accumulated weight of days that were good. She thought about a word: harlot. She thought about standing in the door of a general store with the noon sun catching her badge, and the absolute iron certainty that she was right and she was the law, and she was not going to let it go. She thought about everything that had come after. The letters and the dance and the ring and the children and the commission, and the steadiness of a man who had chosen her completely, and had let her choose him in return. She thought about how she had been afraid, sometimes, that the cost of being who she was in a world that did not always want her to be it would be too high, that she would end up paying something irreplaceable. She had paid some things. She had paid in exhaustion and isolation and years of maintaining a front of certainty that was real but also required enormous effort to maintain. She had paid in the years before Wade, when she had been alone in the best possible kind of way and also in the loneliest kind of way. But she had not paid with herself. She had not compromised or contracted or bent into a shape that fit someone else's idea of what she ought to be. She was Hannah Norris. She was still the Marshal. She had a husband she loved and 2 children who were already, in their small and particular ways, becoming who they were going to be. She had work that mattered and people who depended on it, and a territory that was better in small but real ways, for the fact that she had been in it. Her father's badge was on her chest. It had always been on her chest. Marcus fell asleep in his chair, as children do, between one moment and the next, going from demanding geological explanations to completely unconscious without any apparent transition. Wade lifted him carefully and carried him inside, moving with the easy competence of someone who had done this many times. She sat on the porch alone for a moment in the autumn evening. The desert was very large and very quiet. The stars were beginning to appear above the canyon walls, the enormous desert stars that she had always loved, that made you feel the scale of things and the smallness of your own trouble, and also, paradoxically, the importance of it. Wade came back out and sat beside her, and she leaned against him without needing to think about it, and he put his arm around her with the same automatic ease, and they watched the stars come out together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "All of it." From the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. "Good things?" She looked up at the enormous sky. "Mostly good things," she said. "Hard things that became good things, which I think is better." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I think so too," he said. The night deepened, and the stars multiplied, and the desert lay around them vast and still. And inside the house, their children slept the clean, uncomplicated sleep of children who are safe and loved. She thought, "This is what I was fighting for, all of it, the badge and the work and the standing up in doorways and the refusing to be smaller. Not just for this, not only for this, but including this, including exactly this." She reached up and held the hand that was around her shoulder, and he laced his fingers through hers, and they sat together on the porch of their house in the New Mexico Territory in the autumn of 1891. And the world was very good, and they were in it together, and she was exactly who she had always been. Marshal Hannah Langley, née Norris, still the Marshal, still keeping every promise she made, still proud of it, still right to be.